Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program Jennifer Berkshire, freelance journalist, co-host of Have You Heard podcast, author of The Education Wars, A Citizen's Guide and Defense Manual, which she co-authored with Jack Schneider, who we've also had on the program a couple of times. Jennifer, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real honor to be back.
So, and we've talked over the years, and I think I probably first interviewed Jack during the Obama years, maybe even in the first or maybe early second term. There's been so much that's happened with education fights, public education fights, really since the Bush years, in terms of like a concerted assault that took a couple of different sort of like, I guess, a couple of different forms, I should say. And on some level, like it feels like over the past 5 years, really during the Biden administration, and maybe even prior to that, that like the Democrats have sort of like gotten out of the game, as it were, in pushing back on what's happening. It's been very, very strange. I know that's why you wrote the book, but just expand on that and give people a sense of where we're at.
Yeah, because we could identify for folks what the Republicans have been up to over the last several years, and they would recognize instantly the way that, Republicans leapt on an issue like parents' rights and how they were so convinced after Glenn Youngkin's upset win in Virginia that this was going to be their issue. This was going to be the thing that attracted suburban women back into the fold, right? People recognize that story instantly. And then you ask them, well, gee, what have the Democrats been up to? And the answer is not a whole lot. That, they got very excited during the Obama years, as you mentioned. They went all in on a particular vision of fixing schools. We were going to have a lot more charter schools. We love testing. We were going to evaluate teachers on the basis of their student test scores. And that agenda has really fallen by the wayside, partly because the Republicans have moved so far to the right now. The bipartisan consensus has really fallen apart, but also because the Democrats just don't have a lot to say. And that is actually a big part of why we wrote the book, to try to wake folks up, to say, hey, we have this thing, this public education system that is actually like a real national success story. It's amazing that we provide kids with education K through 12 that they don't have to pay for, that we tax ourselves to make sure everybody gets it. You could never set something up like that today. Why are you guys, you Democrats, having such a hard time making the case for an institution that's as important as this one?
Well, maybe we could see a shift if Kamala Harris picks someone like Bashir over Shapiro, right? Like those two people are a massive contrast in between the perspectives that you describe.
That is absolutely right. So Bashir is the governor of Kentucky, where private school vouchers are going to be on the ballot in November. Kentuckians will go to the polls to decide whether they want to change their state constitution to allow for taxpayer dollars to go to religious schools. And everywhere this gets put up for a vote, people vote against it. They hate this idea. And so you've got Bashir out there saying, like really positioning himself as a loud advocate for public schools because he recognizes that it's good politics. He recognizes that his state, which is very rural, has staunch supporters of public schools, even in its reddest counties. And then you contrast that with Governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, who's the only Democratic governor to be a voucher supporter. And honestly, to come out with a position like that right now, when we can look at these states where Republicans are enacting these sweeping school voucher programs that don't do any of the things that we've been promised over the last couple decades, that it turns out not to have anything to do with kids in quote unquote failing schools or the civil rights issue of our time. What they're doing is they're picking up the tab for parents who already send their kids to private schools, affluent parents, and they're blowing up their state budgets in the meantime. So I would be so sad to see somebody like a Shapiro picked, not just because I think that school vouchers are a terrible issue, but because they're really, they have the potential to rally folks across party lines. And how stupid of the Democrats if they were to give up on that opportunity.
All right. Before we get into that, I want to go back though first, because I want to give like a sense of like where we have been, why the Democrats have disengaged in this, and what the sort of the fundamental underlying importance of public education is. And people should remember that really, public education wasn't invented in Reconstruction, but it was really established as a federal sort of project in Reconstruction, because of the understanding that having a public education system was crucial to creating equality and to creating the sort of like the fundamental aspects of citizenship in our country. I mean, it's no coincidence that it was a Reconstruction project, and so and I know that is like sort of like what has been missing on some level from this conversation. I want to circle back that, but could you just like briefly walk us through? We had No Child Left Behind, then we had Race to the Top, which was aided and abetted by the Obama administration. This sort of like corporate education reform, not to a large extent sort of accelerated by the Gates Foundation. And then they found out that it didn't work by their own Rand Corporation report, that their whole project was a mistake. They should have listened. But we had a generation or two of teachers who were brought in, and one generation completely demoralized, it seems, and a new generation that was brought in without any sort of like foundational appreciation of what I think public education was about. Can you walk us through some of that history?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And I think it's so important for people to realize that all the policies that you just laid out very clearly there, they're all still on the books in all of these states. So you have a lot of places right now where teachers are dealing with the intense culture war stuff from the right, while at the same time, they're still under the kind of, the gun of No Child Left Behind, and then the ratcheting up of that from the Obama administration, which was basically to say, we're going to hold you, teacher, accountable for student test scores. And then, during that whole long period between George W. Bush and Obama, the way that we came to understand public schools and their function in society drastically narrowed. And so those really important words that we heard from you, Sam, things like equality and citizenship, those were never mentioned. Instead, it was all about college and career, and we were going to define school and whether it was good or not on the basis of whether or not it raised student test scores. And so you fast forward to the present, and the reason that the campaign on the right to dismantle public schools, to defund them, to move as many kids as possible into private religious schools, it has nothing to do with test scores or teacher evaluations at all. In fact, one of the truly astonishing things about these huge voucher programs that Republicans are setting up in all of these states, and we're about to reach our 12th state where one of these programs is on the books now, that these programs actually make it impossible to track the performance of students in schools. That's how we know that all the rhetoric around student achievement turned out that really wasn't what people cared about, particularly on the right. And so you see this sort of full frontal attack on public schools. And I think what Jack and I are so concerned about is that we have a very short window of time to remind people that what you were talking about, Sam, the fact that we have public education in this country in the first place because of that vision of equality, right? And it's why we're so often disappointed in schools, because we hope so fervently that they're going to make the country a more equal place. And we can talk about why that's so difficult, but having an entire party that has forgotten the role of schools in preparing kids for citizenship, forgotten that they're a pillar of our democracy. So I'm here today, and I think you are here today to try to wake them up to that reality.
Yeah, I think this is so fundamentally misunderstood, I think. And it's very much, I mean, look, this is one of the most sort of like late stage capitalist sort of, I think, phenomena that we have, which is where education is reduced to being strictly a something that you can measure in terms of return on investment in dollars, as opposed to like social cohesion, citizenship, community, all of these other things that an education was supposed to, mobility, just in terms of not just like economic mobility, but just sort of being able to meet other people and express ideas, and all of this seems to have been lost. And it's fascinating to me, the dynamic between, you have these right wingers who fundamentally despise public education because of this. I mean, it goes back. You can just see all this stuff play out in Reconstruction. They do not want, what was an underclass at that time to have the ability to sort of like say, like, wait, these are my rights. This is what I am, an equal part of society, et cetera, et cetera. You have that on the right. And then you have the sort of the neoliberal agenda, which supposedly is going to maximize this return on investment, measured by the same way that you would measure an investment if it was corporate. They go in there, and what they do is they basically till up the ground and destroy that connection, that mental connection between what public education is supposed to be. It's supposed to be to develop good citizens. That goes by the wayside. So all you have left is this like husk. And then Betsy DeVos comes in, and talk about Betsy DeVos, because you say, I think the chapter is okay. It's not, well, I don't know exactly which chapter it was, but the idea that like they don't have a problem with public education, but they have a problem with public schools. Like Betsy DeVos and her husband were big on this. They want that dumb money. They just want it to go different places.
Yeah, people have forgotten about Betsy DeVos because, she stepped down towards the end of Trump's term, and then we didn't hear much from her. But she is an enormous bankroller of all of the stuff that's playing out in red states right now. And so there was some terrific CNN reporting that her group has spent something like $250 billion with a B, dollars on trying to get these voucher programs through with great success. And I think the point you make is so good because, the Democrats who were very keen on something like school choice, folks like Cory Booker, for example, or even Barack Obama, they really believed that we had, that the end goal was something like public charter schools, that, we would fund them with our tax dollars, and then we would be so impressed by the fact that they were able to raise student test scores, and that would be it. And of course, that wasn't it at all. The end goal for folks like Betsy DeVos, it's not even just to move funds from public school to private religious schools. It's to completely redefine education so that it's divorced from any place at all. They use the expression unbundling all the time, the way that we're now supposed to unbundle from our cable companies and just stream stuff. And so that's the idea, that's the vision for schooling, that your parents would just buy stuff on Amazon and call it school. And think about what an alienating existence that is. Think about all of the problems we face right now that absolutely demand a collective solution. And here you are rolling through these policies that are intended to defund schools, even in rural communities where public schools, as we all know, are the central public institution.
Right. And also, I would say that that's a big motivation for the right in cutting into school lunches, cutting arts and after school programs, but also saying like, hey, you've got to pay for your lunch. And this should not be a institution for the community where kids can go and be a part of a community and learn from one another. We want to make this as threadbare as possible so that perhaps alternatives look better. I mean, this is just classic austerity politics at the end of the day.
I think that that's a key observation. And then the other thing that I would really encourage folks to do is to pay attention to how you see these policies all being enacted together. It is no coincidence at all that the same states that now have sweeping school voucher policies on the books are also rolling back protections for child workers. They're also saying that we're not going to participate in the federal school lunch program. We're not going to pay for all kids to have school lunch. And so I think the question that we have to ask is, how do the folks who are enacting these policies, how do they see the world? And I think that our sort of logical conclusion is always that, well, they're interested in making more money. Betsy DeVos and her ilk see this as an opportunity to cash in. But we argue in the book that it's actually something much more fundamental, that these folks look around and they see hierarchy and inequality as the natural state of the world. And something that works against that, like public education, fully funded schools where kids get to learn all kinds of stuff, that works against the natural state of things. And as they see it, there are just some kids who were meant to go into the bean fields or the factories or the mines. And so doesn't it just make a lot of sense then to start dismantling the institution, the main institution we have in this country that says, you kid can be whatever you want to be?
I mean, there's Paul Wolfowitz famously got in front of Congress in describing why they went after Iraq. And they said weapons of mass destruction was the thing we could all agree on. And that sort of feels like the assault on education. For Betsy DeVos, if she had the ability, just like the government will function to collect the taxes, and then we will take that money and we will fund basically, what they would call in Pakistan madrasas, religious schools. And then some of the wealthy people would also, let's talk about the voucher program, the reality of vouchers. And then we could talk about charters. But the reality of vouchers is that in every place it's been employed, and to the extent that there's been any accountability, people have found that the number of students who are actually going to secular private schools is incredibly low for the first time. In other words, they were already going. This is a subsidy to rich people to go to that private school. There has been some people who go for the first time to like religious schools, but the number of people who it's actually like supposedly what's sold on, like we're going to give real choice, that's not happening.
No, it's not happening at all. And that's, these programs make it very difficult to track where the money's going, but we do have access to that data. And in state after state, the statistics are staggering. 75%, 80%, and even states that have had voucher programs on the books for a long time, a state like Indiana or Ohio, over time, you see the percentages of kids who are, say, kids of color or low-income kids, their participation in these programs is dropping, and the folks who are more likely to participate are getting wealthier. And actually, the statistics you cited about it's not secular private schools. That there are very few secular private schools in this country. This money
and
is
you're not
going,
getting into them with the $2,000 or $5,000 that you're getting from the voucher.
It is not going to pay for Phillips Exeter Academy. Instead, the money is going to pay the tuition for private religious schools for parents who already send their kids to those schools. Why does that matter? Because the folks who are proponents of this vision understand that it is now going to be next to impossible to take that benefit away. So suddenly you have not only a lobby group, a new lobby group in these states, but they are a lobby group of affluent parents with influence. And so you look at a state like Arizona, where their voucher program is turning out to be unbelievably expensive, close to now $1 billion a year. Not only is it cutting into school funding, public school funding, but it's forcing Arizona policymakers to make cuts to other programs, like, for example, water infrastructure. Can you imagine? It's 115 degrees in Arizona on a good day, and you are now cutting investment in water infrastructure so that you can pick up the tab for parents who already sent their kids to private religious schools. It makes no sense unless you have a real kind of a grim vision where we're all sort of fighting against each other for scrap.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.